Yeah, we have the assignment manager expert and who's addressing a very typical scenario in that the customer wants to do bulk reassignment of accounts.
So bulk assignment of accounts, not necessarily the related child objects, including a lead, an opportunity, or appointments, but just the account itself.
Just the account. Okay. Why don't we actually just take a slight step back and just, because there could be some newbies watching this as well as people that are real experts.
Okay.
So let's talk about what the default assignment behavior is. Out of the box, the customer center team has a couple of profile options set that means an account gets assigned automatically when it's created or when it's updated. And the default setting for those is to run account assignment that way, but sometimes you do find that implementations maybe turn that off early in the implementation cycle because maybe they're still in the process of creating their territories and the last thing they want is assignment to be happening. Particularly large volume implementations that have got sort of tens, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of accounts, the last thing they need is account assignment being triggered every time somebody updates something. So having said that, there's some intelligence in that automated assignment on create and update. It doesn't, obviously when an account is created, it will run assignment for it, but on the update, it's not the update of any field on the account. It's limited to the fields that you typically use in territory assignment, such as the org type, the customer size, the industry, and those auxiliary classifications, as well as the account name, the address information. So it only triggers reassignment of accounts when one of those fields is updated.
Okay.
But then for sort of big implementations that do have the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of accounts, for them really batch assignment, I think we think is really the best way for them to go. And what we have is a set of seeded view criteria. And one that's probably most relevant there is for I've got new accounts or I've got updated accounts that had one of these industry or org type fields got updated. But I want to schedule it so that maybe once a day in the evening the account assignment runs. And batch assignment really is the best way to go. And there is a reassignment view criteria. That would be the sort of preferred view criteria to use. And then that will restrict it to being only that set of accounts that are flagged for assignment or reassignment get included in that particular batch.
Right.
Okay, so that's the scenario when your territory has been set up and yeah, you just want, you're not changing any of the territory ownership or anything like that. You're just updating the new records or the updated records to correctly assign them.
That's it. So yes, actually that's a nice segue onto the next one is, okay, what if I start making changes to my territory? The territory structure changes, or I am expanding the coverage of a particular territory or reducing the coverage of a territory. And there is what I guess internally we tend to refer to as, auto assignment following territory proposal activation. And when we make those changes to a territory, that's in the classic UI, that's all done within a proposal. And when that's activated, there is a process that can run behind the scenes that goes and calculates what are all the territories that are affected. Now, there's a profile option that's associated with that mechanism to figure out the affected territories, and that's known as, define if partial reassignment is enabled. Yeah. That particular profile option, since I think it was release 9, has been set to no, which means when I make changes to territories, it will not automatically trigger reassignment of any account relating to those territories that are affected. The primary reason for that is there's a number of limitations around that affected territory determination process. If you have, just a regular territory with a plain old coverage, and it's a leaf level territory and it fits nicely in a hierarchy where the parent territories have a broader coverage than the leaf level territories, then that would be a perfectly reasonable feature to use. The problem that we've got, though, is if there are implementations that are using manually or included accounts or excluded accounts, or if there are situations where the parent territory is actually got a smaller coverage than the leaf level territory.
Oh.
If you're using grouping territories somewhere within your territory hierarchy, and typically the examples of implementations that have done that is where they've got, you know, the VP level coverage fully defined, those sales manager level territories somewhere in the middle, they're just defined as grouping territories. It's too difficult to actually use the coverage to explain, you know, describe the scope of what that manager really covers. So they just define those as grouping territories. And then underneath, you've got the leaf level territories that have the real coverage that says, okay, this is what the sales rep really covers. So grouping territories are used. If the assignment configuration has been updated in an unpredictable way. And our definition of an unpredictable way is that you have maybe turned off a dimension. You've chosen not to use geography, or you've chosen not to use industry, but you have that geography or industry dimension enabled on the territory side.
Right.
Okay.
And we do have some examples of customers out there that have chosen to define, for example, customer size as part of the territory definition, and they then might use that in assigning leads, but for whatever reason they choose not to use it when doing a territory assignment.
Okay.
So if you find that someone's done an adjustment there, if other examples is where implementations are choosing to use line of business. Now that isn't actually valid for accounts because the line of business concept isn't relevant there. But if somebody's come up with, you know, an alternative or creative solution and they're choosing to use something like line of business and match it to something on the account side, then that could be, it's an example of an unpredictable assignment configuration change.
Okay.
In that case, again, it's another reason why you cannot use the auto assign following that territory proposal activation. And then the last case, or the other one is, again, it's not specific to accounts currently, which if somebody's using territory-based assignment with rule filtering. So where you've got territory-based assignment that's finding a set of matching territories, and then you're applying some rules on top of that that further filters that and maybe eliminates certain territories. In all those kind of cases, what it means is the process that tries to identify the affected territories is not going to accurately identify the correct set of territories. And therefore, if you try to trigger account reassignment based on that, you would possibly be missing some accounts.
Right.
You'd probably be having more accounts go and get reassigned than you'd need, but we're not too worried about that. The one that is the real concern is there could be some accounts that would not get reassigned automatically, and they're the ones that you would. So basically, for implementations that are using any of these kind of territory or custom sort of configuration options for assignment, really the territory proposal automated assignment is not going to be the answer.
Okay.
All right.
So then the next thing is, okay, well, if that option's out, what can I use?
Yep.
Again, that's where you really back to batch assignment. There are a set of seeded view criteria that are available today, and they tend to be based on, it could be all accounts, it could be all accounts that have been updated within a specific date range, and all accounts that are currently unassigned. There's a number of criteria. So some implementations, it's good enough, but I think that's where we're probably getting into people really just coming up with a slightly more creative solution. I know I've made some changes to my territory structure, and I can't figure out what set of accounts I need to reassign. So what I know is I need to reassign every single account. If we've got 10, 20,000 accounts, and I'd say go and run batch assignment with all accounts. Yeah, assignment manager can handle 10, 20,000 accounts. really easily. No one will really notice any performance sort of implications. But for the implementations that have hundreds of thousands and millions of accounts, it's a different deal, because the assignment processing really could take, a number of hours. If we are into the millions, it could take, 10 hours or something.
Mm-hmm.
So examples that we've had, for example, in Oracle Internal, where initially when they were running batch assignment for accounts, they wanted to process all accounts, but that batch was going to take way too long in one go.
Mm-hmm.
So what they wanted to do was say, well, how can I subset that batch,
Right.
so that I can identify, if I've got worldwide operations, the accounts that are located in APAC, I'd like to run a batch that includes those kind of accounts, and I want to run it, out of business hours for Asia.
Yeah.
Really, that's what we'd probably be saying, using something like Groovy to identify the set of records, and then probably using Groovy to update the last updated date. Set it to a particular kind of date, and then you can use those existing seeded view criteria we have available. But the kind of date you're going to be putting in is go include all the accounts that were updated, on this date, and maybe that date is 2011 or something. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of something that Oracle Internal use, and I still think it, while not ideal, I think it probably is one of the sort of one of the few options that we offer to large implementations at this point.
Josephine, excuse me, just a question here. Would we recommend a method for a customer to try to ascertain the size of their impact? You're distinguishing between 50, 100,000 accounts and multiple hundreds of thousands or millions of accounts. What happens in a scenario where a customer may not be sure, overall, collectively, there is, let's say, 750,000 accounts. They're not sure, a customer sales department may not be sure how much are impacted by a required change. It could be driven by, as you say, industry. It could be driven by a product, or just could be driven by a resource moving into a different role. How could they ascertain how much this may impact, and then which would be the correct technique to execute subsequent? Could they run a territory proposal to try to get a guesstimate as to the number of accounts that may be affected by their proposed change?
I think that certainly is a good approach, because that will give you an estimate. The only thing I would say is, if they're using some of those features that we talked about, such as they're using account inclusions, they're
Yes.
not necessarily going to get an accurate picture there of the right number of accounts. They'll either get too many, or maybe they'll get some that are missing. But if they're not an implementation that's using maybe every combination of those sort of exceptions that I talked about, then that probably is it's a good thing to use that territory management feature to go and see, okay, let me go and see how many, I've changed this territory, let me see how many accounts now get assigned to, would be assigned to it.
Yep.
And that's available within the territory management.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, staying in the business theme here, I would probably suggest, and Joanne, please keep me straight here. It's probably recommended to look at on an individual rep basis to use the techniques we've described here as you get into more aggregate levels of management or director and VP levels. There may be larger volume impacts here with decisions. So base it accordingly. If you have a rep who has transitioned for whatever reason outside of their role, you can use the techniques described here. Generally speaking, reps don't have hundreds of thousands of accounts at a time, etc. However, as you go into sales managers, sales directors, etc., their aggregation could start pushing the limits of reasonable performance impacting. So bear that in mind as you go through. If it's a rep change, you can use some of these techniques. Managers, directors, VP levels, you have more potential for performance impacts. Okay.
Okay.
So I think the last one that I wanted to cover was, another, maybe potentially another option would be the other way to run bulk assignment would be following the import of accounts. So
Okay.
if you are able to roughly identify the set of accounts that are affected by a territory change or maybe a rep move, one option would be to use the account export and import process, particularly looking at the import process, to go and say, I've been able to identify this set of accounts that are associated with this particular rep. Let me use the import process to import the accounts that currently are associated with that rep. Make some change to that account, to each of those accounts, and then have the assignment process automatically trigger following the import. And that would be another way to sort of, limit the scope so you're not running account assignment on a really broad number of accounts.
Right.
If you've got an isolated kind of rep change, that might be one option for how to isolate assignment just to the set of accounts that need to, maybe the end result is still the same, or but maybe there's a change to the territory assignment.
Yeah, that's a good point for those newbies out there. What we're talking about here is exporting out the accounts to get critical information through file-based import capabilities, and then in the example here, changing rep A to rep B, and then you do that in the exported files, you re-import. It does not duplicate the accounts. File-based import has the intelligence at that point in time. It's performing an upsert, as we call it. So it's updating the existing records in the database, not inserting duplicates with a new rep name to them.
And associated with that, there's a profile option that controls whether assignment automatically runs following that import. And by default, that is set to yes, i.e. automatically run assignment. But again, many implementations might find that fairly early on in the implementation cycle, they may turn off that profile option. They may set that profile option to don't automatically run assignment. And that's because if they're in the process of defining the territories or updating territories, the last thing they need is to be constantly having the account assignment occurring every time they import another set and then another set of accounts. Particularly when they do that initial account load, generally the recommendation is they don't have automated assignment set up until they've got all accounts imported into the implementation. Make sure the territory structure is set up. They're happy with the territory structure. Take a couple of individual accounts, run assignment for those particular accounts, check the sort of territory assignment results are accurate, and then they can turn on, then they could go and do batch assignment to go and assign all the accounts in the system. But it might be that that profile option is still set to say don't automatically run assignment following import. So it's important to make sure that that is that's set, and that's the customer center profile option.
So when
oh, sorry,
I just had a question because, I'm not as knowledgeable as you guys, of course, about this, but when you're using file import, I mean, you still need, in your territory, you still need to swap out sales rep A for sales rep B. You do.
So yes, let's talk about that particular example. I know that a sales rep has left the company and I have a new sales rep. You possibly, as part of that, maybe the coverage definition of the new rep's territory has changed. Maybe that territory definition has shrunk, and maybe a fellow sales rep's territory definition has expanded. In that case there, what you really want to do is you need to make sure that the territories are updated appropriately. Then you know that, okay, there's a couple of sales reps that are affected here. You would want to sort of export the accounts associated with those two sales reps.
Got it.
You make some sort of, really a dummy actually, Dave, maybe that. Do they actually have to make an update to any of the data on the accounts that they exported before re-importing them?
They need to update the rep name. And it's assumed the new rep is in the system and is identified, and then correspondingly the file-based import will run the metadata lookup for the rep, get the appropriate metadata, and then update accordingly.
Okay, and then obviously if you've got it configured to automatically run assignment following the import, each of those accounts will get reassigned, and either they'll get the new rep's territory on there, and possibly they'll get the alternative rep's territory assigned to the account.
And what happens to that owner field?
It
The
just,
owner field.
The owner field.
Oh, I love
Nothing,
that.
right?
My favorite topic.
Yes.
Unfortunately, today, the territory assignment of accounts does not influence the owner field on the account. The current recommendation is that if a particular implementation wants to update the owner based on the territory assignment to the account, that they would use Groovy to be able to do that. And we do have a white paper that's available with some sort of sample code on how you could go about doing that.
Okay.
so just a couple of additional notes to follow up on this, just understanding and stepping back and looking at it from an aggregate level here. When we're talking about swapping a rep around, rep who's moved for whatever reason, obviously the new rep has to be entered into the system before we can do this file-based import.
Mhm.
Also, if your business requirement or the business unit requirement is, again, to focus in on the ownership of the account, then you have subsequent steps you need to do above and beyond this discussion to follow through up on that. Correspondingly, activities or leads or opportunities need to be looked at independently as well. This topic is very focused upon bulk account reassignment. That's all.
I think there's one last question that you'd had, Anne and Dave, about what about if a VP or a sales manager wants to go and assign a specific account? Then on the simplified UI, there is a run assignment option. And that's available to anybody who has visibility into an account. That option is available, and if you know something about that account has changed, or if the particular implementation is configured not to use automatic assignment when you update an account, but you want that to change the industry on a particular account, and you'd like that to be reflected immediately in the territory assignment result, what you can do is choose that run assignment option, and that will go and run assignment just for the particular account that the user's on, and then would update the territory accordingly.
And that's a menu option right on that specific account.
It is. That's it. There's an actions menu that's available across all the subtabs.
Yep.
So in release 10, there is the territory proposal that you can update on the fly, really.
There is. In release 10, we start to have the ability to manage and maintain territories through the simplified UI.
Mm-hmm.
And that basically is, there's no proposal. There's an active version of a territory, and when you make changes using that simplified UI, that will happen immediately to the active version of that territory. There's no proposal that's used.
Right.
So that affected territory determination process we talked about earlier is out of the picture here because there are no proposals. So again, if you are making, it's really seen that typically you would use it for relatively minor changes. Mm-hmm. It's when one sales rep leaves, or a sales rep takes a leave of absence, and maybe the manager now needs to sort of take ownership of their territory for a short period of time. In those particular cases, again, you've got batch assignment as an option, or you have the export and import flow that we talked about, and then triggering assignment automatically as the options to handle that.
Cool. So when Oracle did the internally, they'd figured out how to segment so that X number of records would be exported and imported.
I would advise it would be applicable for large volumes. I guess if we were giving best practice guidance, one would be, if you can, run a proposal to see your affected size of accounts. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you're over 100,000, 200,000, that sort of range, start to look at segmentation options that may be available as illustrated here. You may run some Groovy script to get last updated ranges. You may do Groovy scripting to get other attributes to assist in segmenting that 200, 300,000 or more size. And if you can get that, then, as illustrated, I would suggest grabbing or developing Groovy scripts, and this is going to be on a case-by-case basis, so there's no standard here. So you're going to develop Groovy scripts that can help you segment that to a manageable size. Mm-hmm. So global implementations, as the example was given here, where we have an Asia Pacific region that's affected, and there may be 400,000 accounts in that region, we don't want to impact their usability online. Correspondingly, we don't want the rest of the world to be impacted as well. So you have to come up with an agreeable volume size and see, you know, maybe 100,000 accounts are affected at a time and try to target that. You can implement that using Groovy script, segment it, run your jobs. Minimal impact in terms of performance, both for the targeted region in this geography example and for the remaining users online if it is a global 724 scenario.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Actually,
Yep.
yeah, let me add actually something then to just draw people's attention to it. In an implementation that has these large volumes, where maybe the batch assignment runs, you know, for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, we do have some diagnostic tools available. Again, there's a white paper about running assignment in diagnostic mode, and then also being able to use the diagnostic reports to learn more about how quickly and how effectively is the assignment process running on a batch that's currently in process or a batch that previously ran, and you can get the sort of statistics that exactly, you know, how many records did it process, how many records were successful, number that failed, what was the throughput. It would also sort of help you identify how many different sub-batches were generated. So you can really get a sense. And for large implementations, I think we think that's a really very effective tool to get a sense of how is my assignment process running? Is it meeting my performance expectations, or do I need to do some follow-up work? And there certainly are some things that the implementations would be able to do to tweak their performance of their batch account assignment processing.
So a follow-up question on that then would be, how would a team lead know when they're having some challenges? So let's take a large case scenario here, 3 or 4 hours execution. I guess I'm wondering is how do the information they get back from the diagnostic tool, how would they start seeing flags that, hey, there's a concern here and maybe we should do some tweaking?
Sure. I think it would be if you've got a batch that's currently running and say it's been running for an hour, what you're able to do is run the diagnostic report, and it will sort of give you a sense of, it will tell you how many records are in the batch in total, how many it's processed so far, what your throughput rate was.
Right.
And it would allow you can use that really as a reasonable estimate for, okay, how much longer is this batch going to take? I think if people start to see trends where, you know, it was taking 2 hours and now it's taking 2.5, and, you know, a week from now it's taking 3 hours, that's when you know that's a sign that there possibly, I guess it's time to look at seeing, can I improve performance?
Right.
And we do have, again, some tools. There's one particular one about tweaking the sequence in which we use the pieces of information when doing our assignment matching. By default, we have it configured so we say geography is usually the most divisive element of doing assignment processing. Yeah, why? Because usually there's some piece of information that's going to get me, instead of looking for, you know, 1,000 matches, very quickly when I take the geography associated with the count, I'm automatically probably going to be down to, maybe now I'm just looking for all the territories that match in this particular state. So from suddenly being 1,000 records you're trying to match against, you're suddenly down to maybe 10, 15, 20 records. But obviously, not all implementations use the same dimensions. Yeah, they don't. Some use geography, some use account, some use industry. So what you've got is the ability to go and sort of say, actually, for our implementation, we would like to change the sequence in which the pieces of information are used. And again, in that diagnostic white paper, we have a particular report that can be run that allows people to go and interpret what is, you know, how is my particular implementation configured, and maybe what is the right kind of sequence that I should set my assignment mapping. What order should I put them in?
Also, a very subtle point here that was brought up and something we should encourage. As part of a standard operations model, it's highly recommended for mid and large size implementations for the operations team to monitor their types of jobs as they run very early in production, 3 months later, 9 months later, a year later, and do some comparative analysis. Just as illustrated, you may find your original batch job was well within a 2 or 3 hour window, but now is a 4 or 5 hour window. And that may be a result of changes in business requirement where there may have been more territory conditions to be met, or it could be a situation where there's more volume, more users on the system, etc. So please do an operational run and analysis periodically to monitor that so you can be aware of the performance improvements that you need to do later on.
Okay, so I will definitely put the link to the landing page in My Oracle Support for all of the assignment manager docs.
Super.
Okay, thank you. Yay, we did it.